I'm going to talk about some hunting today. Been about 16 years ago. My son Landon drew a Wyoming sheep permit. And he and I hunted some of this country that's day type hunting, in during the day and out the same day and one thing another. And in some instances we were finding rams, and some instances we weren't. And we certainly weren't finding the type of ram that he was looking for. He was looking for a ram that's better than a full curl ram. That's very, very tough to draw a sheep permit. So anyway, he decided that what he wanted to do was pack into the remote country of Wyoming here called the thoroughfare. So he talked about this with his brother, and he talked about this with me, and so the three of us headed out of here to pack back in by horses and mule. Had a single mule at the time. I was the one riding the mule, and we had 9 head of horses and a mule for the three of us. So there were 6 pack animals, 3 riding animals, and we cut out of here at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Had to drive about 60 some odd miles into another valley and unload these animals and saddle everything up, saddle up all the pack horses, basically load all of our panniers and one thing another, loads for these animals into panniers. When you do this sort of thing, you have to weigh your panniers. You want them to weigh the same weight. Panniers are either a bag or a box hung on the side of the pack, both sides of the pack saddle. And these things need to be balanced even so that the pack doesn't want to move to one side or the other, and so forth. And it's a pretty good chore saddling up and packing these animals. And if I remember, we probably got headed up the trail at about 8:30 in the morning. So it took us somewhere around, we left here at 4 o'clock. Took us about an hour and 20 minutes to drive there. All the rest of that time was spent packing animals and one thing another. And so we were headed into some real remote country and going over country. People in Wyoming here that have been lucky enough to hunt the thoroughfare. A lot of us have been over the proverbial Deer Creek Pass. Well, it can be a real trying situation. There's shovels that are stored on that pass to shovel your weight out if you're snowed in there, and one thing another. Well, we weren't in a snow situation, but this trail winds up some of the roughest country in the world. And the trail is from about this wide to maybe about that wide, built, something around 100 years ago or so. And there's a lot of places where that trail goes right straight off into the bottom of the canyon, 1,000, 1,500 feet. So you don't spend any time on your horse or your mule looking off into the bottom of the canyon. You look at the trail and you pay attention to the trail, and all the stock has to stay on that trail. And we had a big draft horse, a big black draft horse that we packed. He was really a big animal, and there was a lot of times that a third of his hoof was hanging over the side of the trail where he was, you know, where the trail was, and as wide as this animal was. So it took us many hours to get to the top of Deer Creek Pass. And I don't know if I remember right, I think it's maybe around 12 miles to there. We were headed into some country about 32 miles in. Now, because of the time factor and everything else, we couldn't make that 32 miles in a single day. So we stopped around somewhere around 24 miles or so in, and just simply, you know, unpack things. We had cots, good sleeping bags. It was wonderful weather, and we just simply set our cot out in the open and threw our sleeping bag on it and went to bed. Of course, we had to fix our dinner and everything and take care of all these animals, you know, hobble them and or picket them so that they would be there in the morning and so forth. And the very next day we got up, you know, before sunrise, and we were gathering things up and had a breakfast and saw that we had everything that we needed for lunch all through the day, and snacks and one thing another on our riding animals. Packed everything, made sure everything was packed just perfectly right. We hadn't really changed our packs much, so, you know, we just simply repacked how we were pretty close. Packed everything up just how we were from a weight standpoint, and we headed in. Have to cross a lot of rough country. It's a fairly good trail. A lot of creek drainages, a lot of meadows. The most fantastic looking country. Big, huge mountains and plateaus and cliffs. Huge meadows. Places you could just see for ages and ages, and when you get on top of that country going in there, you can really see a long ways. You know, you can see ahead probably 35 miles or better, and some in the distance twice that far. But you can't see it very well unless you've got, you know, high power optics to look at it from a far distance. But anyway, we got into some of that country where we had an idea that these sheep were living. We had some bit of information that there were sheep living in this particular area, and we headed off the main trail into a place there's no trail, and it was really touch and go, a lot of down deadfall trees, and we got through the greatest majority of that, and my son just kind of, you know, he was frustrated after crossing some of that deadfall country, and so I said, I think maybe we need to just all take a rest and have a snack. And we had a snack, and I told him, I says, I'm not sure where we got to go, and I said, we don't need to mess up, so I'm going to take off by myself, just walking by myself, and I know there's a remnant of a trail in this country from information that I had, and so I started working up country, working up a drainage, and I picked up the trail. I'd walked it for maybe oh, I'm gonna guess a half a mile or something like that. So I was pretty sure that I was on the right track and everything. And I come back and we gathered everything up, and the three of us headed in, and I was pretty much in the lead to know where I was going. And then eventually Landon took the lead, and his brother, and then I stayed to the rear. And anyway, we worked our way into that country, and it was kind of touch and go, but you'd be on trail and you'd be off of it, and you know, there was a few blowdowns and a few things like that, a few washout things. We spent, you know, until late in the afternoon, like around 4 o'clock or something like that, before we got into this country where we wanted to be. And there was a nice spring running out of the mountain, which of course was our drinking water. A place near there to be able to, you know, grassy area there to be able to hobble and pick at animals and everything else. And we picked everything all out, and there was a, you know, years old type campsites. So there we built a good fire and set up all of our camp and everything. And Landon and his brother Flint, they hunted for a number of days, for about 3 days, and I pretty much stayed and watched the stock and kept track of things. And I'd wander off to a couple of different places afoot with plenty to eat and a gun and my binoculars and spotting scope, and search the country for sheep. And we weren't I wasn't finding anything. And every day I was taking a cool kind of a spit bath, you know. In that country, you do a lot of exertion and a lot of sweating. It takes a lot of energy out of you. It just wrings you out. So long about the fourth or fifth day or so, I decided that I would go with Landon, and Flint would stay in the camp and keep track of things. And we headed out way up high, up on top of the plateaus of the mountain, looking way off into the far distance of Yellowstone. And we found rams, and there was a shootable ram, but it didn't satisfy Landon. He wanted something pretty extra special. And anyway, we hobbled horses and went different points there to be able to glass and one thing and another. Got back to camp, and when we were coming into camp, we noticed that the young horse we had with us, a 3-year-old, he was acting kind of indifferent and acting almost like he wanted to lay down. Well, I knew that he had rolled on top of the mountain up there somewhere with a saddle on, and one thing and another, and it all boiled down to the fact that he twisted his gut, and we had to, you know, the next morning, we took turns all night with a campfire built, trying to keep the horse up, hoping that maybe he'd roll another direction and straighten his gut out. We didn't, but we had to put that horse down up in the high country. And so now it's in the 7th day, and we packed out of that country and came home, and we spent about 10 days or 2 weeks at home. And Landon and I headed into the country again, but we were only going about just not quite as far as we went the first day before, and we were hunting that part of the country. And we set up our hunting camp and everything. We strung an electric fence around the area for our animals. You know, we only had let's see, 5 animals with us that time. 2 riding animals and 3 pack animals. And anyway, in the middle of the night, we heard some commotion and one thing and another, and I could hear my my mule dragging a picket stake. It's made out of steel, and I could hear it clanging on rocks, and we figured out that there was a damn grizzly that was trying to get to the horses and mules, but mules absolutely hate bears. So he drug that picket stake to the far side of the electrified fence that we had there, rigged up in the mountains. And I did a little bit of shooting off into the hillside and hollering and screaming, and we ran the grizzly the hell out of that country. And we never saw him again. But I slept the night right there. I slept the night right there, in our tent, paying attention to everything, and he'd never come back. We didn't have another problem. The next day, we headed in, from camp, left several animals, a couple animals at camp, and we headed sheep hunting, and we hunted around till around mid-morning, and we spotted this great band of rams. And there was one exceptional ram in this bunch of rams that was about 3 inches past full curl. Full curl is above the nose. The horns stick up, come around, and come up above the nose. And anyway, we situated ourselves where we couldn't be seen, and we left the animals and walked in about 400 or 500 yards to where we could get closer to the sheep. And we got positioned at several hundred yards, and Landon shot this great ram. We worked on it and dressed it out, and we skinned the sheep life size for a life size cape. That was the intention and whatnot. And so got those things all packed up, and we came back into camp. And of course now we had fresh meat. We had blood. We were bloody, and one thing another. And of course we washed up and so forth. Ate a real good supper. Had a nice fire built, keep warm for a while. And I slept the night in the tent with the entire sheep, all dressed out and caped, in the tent with us at the foot of my bed. Now I always slept in the mountains listening to horse bells in case horses strayed from where they needed to be, and we always had a horse or two as a wrangler horse tied, and we had that, and the horse able to feed and everything. So all the animals were loose in that electrified corral, except for one was tied outside of their feeding, so that we wouldn't be caught with a problem and couldn't wrangle animals. And Landon sleeps a lot more sound than I do, so we went clear through the night uneventfully. And the next morning we gathered up all of our animals, and now we've got a 24-mile ride out of that country now. There's some uphill coming out of there, and then we go, it's just gradual for miles and miles, and then we go over the pass again and down into this rough country where the canyons are so deep. But anyway, I've known all the old mountain hands of this country. Some people that were involved even building these trails and one thing and another. It took me a lot of years to be able to get into that end of the thoroughfare. I was into the thoroughfare when I was 15 years old from another end. But anyway, that's our sheep our sheep hunting story, you know, Landon's wonderful ram, and at this point in time, because of the disappearance of wildlife, the demand for a lot of this wildlife and what's out there, it's very hard anymore now to draw a sheep permit. So I don't suppose that we'll either either one of us will be able to draw. You know, I've hunted a sheep a lot during my lifetime and taking several rams. Landon took that one nice ram, and I don't think at this point, because of the way that things have changed, to do with license system and drawing odds and everything else, that we'll be able to experience that. I mean, somebody that we know, or one thing or another, we might be on another sheep hunt, but it doesn't look too promising at this point in time. But one thing we need to pay attention is that this wildlife is a renewable resource, but it's been overexploited. We're exploited by people that are just interested in the dollar that they can draw off of that, and that's the game department.
And the predators.
And of course then we've got the predators on top of it, so